that's a great transition to talk about what the Fed is set to do this week. Let's go ahead and put this Bloomberg article up on the screen. They're on track at their Wednesday meeting to raise interest rates by 75 basis points. Again, that's just 0.75%. That's for the second straight month when they meet later in July. As you know, they raised interest rates by a quarter point in March, a half point in May, 3/4 of a point in June. That was the biggest move since 1994, and they are set to replicate it this week on Wednesday. Now, there had been some expectation, which is not completely out the window, but seems like a very outside chance now, that they might go so far as to lift the rates a full 100 basis points. That's a full percentage point. So that would be, quite astonishing and quite significant of a move. But 75 basis points is no joke either. This is an extraordinarily hawkish direction that the Fed is pushing things in. And, they're kind of flying blind. No one really has a great sense of exactly how these interest rate increases are going to trickle down throughout the economy. We already see huge impacts in terms of financing cars, in terms especially of the housing market. As I was saying before, you're starting to see impacts even in the employment market as well, in spite of the fact that you have had these low unemployment numbers for a long time. The reason that they seem to have backed off of the full 100 basis point move is because they got some data showing that U.S. consumers' long-term inflation expectations actually declined in early July. So they were forecast to go 2.8% versus 3.1% the month before. That's what people's expectations of inflation were. So they sort of looked at that and said, okay, maybe we don't need to go quite so far. But I don't want to underplay how extraordinary of a move this still is to have, for the second month in a row, an interest rate increase that we have not seen since 1994.
Yeah, and actually, what Wall Street, by the way, the 100 basis points is not off the table. I was just reading this morning that Citibank and many other major traders on Wall Street are still betting on that 100. They're willing to be surprised if they do go ahead and hit 75 basis points. And the reason, again, that this matters is that not only was the previous rate hike the highest since 1994, and then you do it again, but it just shows you that given where inflation is right now, which is that we continue to have 40-year highs almost every month since the number comes out, there still doesn't seem to be any indication that they're going to stop. So what others are pointing to, the chief economist over at JP Morgan says the real question is what comes after, because they're going to have to continue hiking rates. They could go up as high as 5, 6, 7, 8, 9%, and they could continue, month after month every time that they have these quarterly meetings. And if they increase 75 basis points over a period of time, we could be looking at mortgage rates which are 9 or 10%. Now, those of you who bought houses in like the 90s won't be that sympathetic, but it's a different country. We haven't lived in a country like that for 30-some years. And I was actually reading that the real issue also is the housing stock. So obviously we have a major housing shortage across the United States. Low interest rates and low mortgage rates. The housing boom was actually fueling a hell of a lot of construction. But now, guess what the problem is? We actually need that construction to finish. We really do. But why would general contractors finish their houses if they can't sell them?
Yeah.
So it actually, the housing increase, while yes, will slow down the housing market, it also will probably increase the housing shortage that we have across the United States. So the investment that we have right now is really a major problem. And also, I can't emphasize enough in the past, which is that the key tool that the Fed has here is targeting demand and increasing unemployment. That is not going to solve the vast majority of inflation that we have right now in 2022. And you flagged this, and look, no fan of Elizabeth Warren here, but to be fair, she's been actually pretty relentless. Let's put this up there on the screen.
She can be good on economics when she's good.
I agree. Yeah. Her trade policy and all that, I always supported. So let's go ahead and put this on the screen. Wall Street Journal opinion page. So very clearly targeted the business economic elite. And she specifically points out here, more aggressive rate hikes are cost millions of jobs and will not address the cause of high prices. And she quotes the Federal Reserve chairman when she asked him whether that was going to bring down the price of gas or food. And he said, quote, "There are many things that we can't affect." again, the reason it matters is your demand at the grocery store is not the reason that we have seen 7 to 10 to 20% increase for 20%, for example, in the price of egg. It's supply. We have massive supply problems. We have fertilizer problems. Climate, obviously, there's a scorcher all across the country. There's wildfires all the way out west, not just here. Brazil had a massive shortage. So coffee is down by there's a shortage of like 40%. That's the reason that there's such crazy increases. And we've had shortages in the economy now for 2 years. We've had bad corporate planning and we've had over financialization. The Fed can't do anything about all those things. And she very articulately lays that out.
Yeah, she did. This was well written.
Yeah.
Very easy for anyone to understand because she makes the argument very clearly. And I mean, it echoes a lot of what we've been saying on the show, frankly. We played for you before that moment when she questioned Federal Reserve Chairman Jay Powell about, so hiking interest rates by the Fed, is that going to deal with increased gas prices? Yeah. Is that going to deal with supply chain shocks? And he very honestly said no. So it's like, okay, she lays down here. She says, all right, so then if raising interest rates by the Fed, if that doesn't solve these underlying issues that are actually the main problem right now, what do they actually do? And she says when the Fed raises interest rates, increasing the cost of borrowing money, it becomes more expensive for businesses to invest in their operations. As a result, employers will slow hiring, cut hours, and fire workers, leaving families with less money. In the bloodless language of economists, that's referred to as dampening demand. But make no mistake, if the Fed cuts too much or too abruptly, the resulting recession will leave millions of people, disproportionately lower wage workers and workers of color, with smaller paychecks or no paycheck at all. So making it clear that, listen, as bad as the inflation situation is, the inflation continuing to soar on top of a recession is a way worse situation.
Yep.
She closes by saying, before the Federal Reserve triggers a recession, Mr. Powell should remember that the one medicine in his kit does not treat every economic illness. Low unemployment and high inflation are painful, but a Fed-manufactured recession that puts millions of Americans out of work without addressing high prices would be far worse. And as I pointed to before, the Washington Post has an article pointing to some of the signs that the job market is starting to slow down. In other words, that yes, not only are we going to have 2 quarters of GDP contraction, which is the sort of standard issue definition of a recession, but even the metrics that the White House is using here are heading in the wrong direction. Let's go ahead and throw this up on the screen. This is according to the Washington Post. They say the job market is beginning to show cracks. Job growth is slowing. Vacancies are down and unemployment claims are ticking up. They point in particular to the tech sector, which has, of course, taken a beating in terms of the stock market. We're going to get a lot of earnings out this week to get a better picture even of what's going on there. Saagar talked about some of this in his monologue yesterday. But they say that tech hiring has fallen 9% in just the past month. That's compared with a 5.4% dip in hiring across all industries. Number of tech firms and startups laying off workers has picked up in recent weeks. You've had Netflix, Tesla, Coinbase, all announcing job cuts or hiring freezes. Vimeo, the online video platform and one-time tech darling, announced this week it is laying off 6% of their staff. They also interview a lot of job recruiters and ordinary workers, some people who, when the job market was super hot, switched jobs or actually recruited into new jobs with big pay increases and exciting new roles and responsibilities, only to see themselves laid off months later because of fears of recession and because of the fact that everything is slowing down. So even the one number that the White House really loves to point to and highlight, the low unemployment number, that is also beginning to show signs of cracking. And as I mentioned before, new unemployment claims are ticking up. Not a good sign.
Yeah, the stuff that I pay even more attention to is like they point here. 7-Eleven, 800 workers at the corporate level. Ford, 8,000 positions in the coming weeks. Meanwhile, Rivian, the electric car maker, down 700. Delivery down 1,500.
That thing has always been a mess, though, hasn't it? Rivian?
Yeah, although I'm gonna say this, Bezos aside, the Rivian looks cool. I've never driven one. I saw one on the road. It looks sweet. However, the mortgage lender, Loan Depot, 4,800 jobs gone ahead and slashed this year. So it's not just tech, and this stuff will bleed into the broader economy, especially if it hits manufacturing. And why this is such a tragedy is we are finally building more stuff in America for the first time in several years.
Right.
The supply chain crisis, the tariffs, all of it, for the first year on record, we actually brought more manufacturing back to the United States. They said it couldn't be done, people. Well, we proved them that we actually could. And now, all of a sudden, a decrease in demand, specifically Fed policy, would absolutely hammer many of these new jobs and would frankly only increase the pressure on the White House right now in order to remove tariffs, to outsource even more, and to cut costs. Because I think that's the other point that we should remember, which is that manufacturing, investment, and all of that doesn't just come out of capital, it comes out of your ability to borrow. And if borrowing is way more expensive, you can't hire more people and you can't invest in your future workforce. And we already know what Wall Street's gonna do. They're gonna cut jobs, try and buy back their own stock in order to try and save their pensions and all this other stuff. But none of that translates into a better economic future, I think, for people. So it's a grim picture. It really is.
And the high level view is that the reason why they are leaning so heavily on this, as Elizabeth Warren puts it, this medicine that is not the right cure for the disease that ails us, is because the only institutions that still function, and I mean function in terms of actually being able to do anything, are basically the ones that are beholden to rich people.
Also non-elected.
And undemocratic, right? I mean, everything else has been completely and intentionally, by the way, hamstrung, gridlocked, made so it, is not responsive to the people whatsoever. And so the only institutions that are left that actually have power and are able to operate, not in a good fashion, but able to operate, are the ones that have been sort of designed by and for rich people, the Fed being key among those. Cable news is ripping us apart, dividing the country, making it impossible to function as a society, and making it impossible to know just what is true and what is false. But the good news is they are failing and they know it.
That is why we're building something new, a new mainstream, a healthier one, something more trustworthy, something that we are going to need in one of the most pivotal times in American history. We are building up here for the midterms, for the upcoming presidential election, but we need your help. So if you can help us out by becoming a premium member today at breakingpoints.com, we're trying to change America for the better and the entire world.
So what are you waiting for, guys? Go to breakingpoints.com and sign up and help us build a new mainstream.